Welcome to My Life, Tanya Applied, with Rabbi Simon Jacobson, a journey into the deepest teachings of Torah and their application to our personal, emotional, and psychological lives.
A good Tevach. I hope you had a kosher and afreilich Pesach, and now we can draw from that energy into the entire year. We continue our journey in the life-changing Sefer Tanya. This program is made possible by Rena Lights LLC, and it is in honor and memory of Rabbi Yosef Halevi Weinberg Olav Hashalom, Rabbi Moshe Pinchas HaKoyen Katz Olav Hashalom, and Rabbi Yoel HaKoyen Khan Olav Hashalom. It's also in schus and merit of Rav Zev Yecheskel HaKoyen and Risha Katz Le'edich Yomim V'Shonim Tevis for many long, healthy years. So, middle of chapter 12 of Tanya, the Beinani. What we learned so far about the Beinani, which in the spectrum of measuring the battle between the two forces, the two voices, the animal soul and the divine soul, Nefesh Elikis and Nefesh Abamis, with the tzaddik being on the top end of the spectrum, the Rasha being at the bottom end of the spectrum, meaning that the tzaddik has conquered the city. The divine soul is completely in control, with the animal soul being vanquished, just the extent of how much. And the Rasha, the battle rages, and the question is just how much the animal soul is speaking, how frequently, how much it affects the person. And the Beinani, the battle is there. However, the expression, the actual control over the person is not of the animal soul. It's the divine soul's garments of thought, speech, and action that is controlling the person's thought, speech, and action of machshava dibur ma'aseh, of Torah mitzvahs. But on the faculty level, the faculties of the divine soul, what he called the muhus va'atzmus nefesh elikis, the core of the divine soul, which is the eser b'chinei seha, these 10 faculties, they're not the only ones that have control and dominance, because the animal soul is also in effect. However, when it comes to thought, speech, and action expression, the garments are controlled by the divine soul, but not the faculties. Okay. However, the Alter Rebbe made an important exception, because to really cover this thoroughly, there are different times. There are times where we have additional energy, additional strength and power to deal with the challenges of life. And that is what he called ki'im be'itum uzamonim, like during Krishma and Tefillah, that's when there's a shas meichin negadlus, a shas hakeshet, an opportune time. So now there's an extra energy flowing from above, which is actually the essence of what every Eis Rotzen is, whether it's Shabbos or Yontif, or even a fast day. It's Eis Rotzen. Here we're talking time of davening, time of Krishma and davening. That what? That there's a shas meichin negadlus, an expansiveness, and that creates also below a shas hakeshet, an opportune time for every person to do what? To connect their mind, Chabad, and intensely bind it, lahaimik daite, to connect his mind, Chochma Bina Das, daite, profoundly meditate and connect to the greatness of godliness. The second thing, that should awaken and stimulate the love that's burning like a fire. And thirdly, that causes Ledovka to attach himself to God through the fulfillment of Torah mitzvahs. Which actually, when you look in Shema, you have all these 3 things. Shema Yisrael Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad is the Izbanus, and the Meich of connecting to the divine on an intellectual level, meditation. V'ahavtas Hashem Elokecha is love, Ahava, and a love with a fiery love. And then the continuation, when you continue, when it says, Ukshartem Loisal Yedecha in the mitzvahs, that's observance of the mitzvahs. So all 3 things are in the Shema. As the Alter Rebbe says, that the Shema, that's midaraisa, that's from the Torah, which means a mitzvah from a biblical commandment. And B'recheser and its blessings, before and after, which is the Rabbanim, which helps set the stage, especially as it's explained in a number of places, that not always can we get to that state of Meichen de Gadlus. So we need to also have additional prayers. That's why the rabbis decreed the blessings that that comes from rabbinic law, achana, that allows us to be in that state of mind and heart and ladovka. So all of that sets the stage. So here you see it's coming both from above, which is the Moichin de Gadlus, the Shas HaKesher, but there's also the effort from below, and maybe that also is hinted to in the idea that it's not just a biblical ordinance, a biblical mitzvah, it's also the Rabbon, which comes so-called an effort from below, from the rabbis, that help create this environment. All this is additional strength to the Beinani, he says L'chol Adam, which is really the midah of the Beinani, is the midah of every person. But now you have an additional element. It's not just that the Beinani has that self-control. That's what we learned till now. Now we're saying there's a special thing that happens. And during this time, all this comes and it says, and va'oz, harasha b'chol lasmoli. Then the ra and the chol lasmoli, because remember, it's active in the animal, in the Beinani. The animal soul is active. Is kaful for bottle. It's subjugated and suppressed. To what? L'teiv hamispashet b'chol ha'yemani. To the goodness that's extending in the right side of the heart where the divine soul rests, which comes from Chabad shebemeach, where the divine soul also rests, as we learned in chapter 9. Hamakusharim, that are bound, as we said, b'gdulas ein sof baruch hu. That's what we're doing during davening, during Shema. So all this gives them that power. And if you look at interesting language here, this is more than just the Beinani controlling thought, speech, and action, and even as a new state of being, not just in behaviorally. Here, the Shas HaKesher, the opportune time, adds that not just the garments, but the actual faculties are also controlled by the divine soul, temporarily during davening. And if you look at the language, it's actually similar language that we learned in chapter 10 about the tzaddik v'rale. What was v'rale? That the ra, that was there from the animal soul, is kofu botloi, to the good of the divine soul. However, there's a big difference. By the tzaddik, it's an actual, complete victory. The question is to the extent, and he's dominated and also conquered the animal soul. Here, the animal soul has not been vanquished. Its faculties are active. It's just by davening we have the extra power. But it's still, during davening, you have a taste, so to speak, of a higher state, not just the Beinani's higher state of being completely controlling their thought, speech, and action, but also the faculties are more alive of the divine soul, where the animal soul's faculties being asleep, as he's going to explain shortly. But there is something in common. So now you see in the Beinani itself, there's also a difference between the Beinani, the regular time of the day, and during Shas HaKesher, the opportune time. Aval, now let's continue. Aval, acharat tefillah. Now he continues, but after davening, that's all b'shas tefillah. When the moichin the gadlus, when that special flow of energy, the windows of opportunities open, opportune time. Aval acharat tefillah. However, after prayer, and here he means tefillah and krishma, just using tefillah as a general term, it means both. Then bistalkus hamoichin the gadlus dein seif baruch hu. When this expanded higher consciousness departs, he says, "Istalkus hamechin." So what happens then? Hari hara, the ra of the animal soul, chayzer v'nir, chayzer v'neir b'chol hasmali. The evil of the animal soul's selfish needs in the left side of the heart reemerges and awakens. Because remember, the faculties were never completely suppressed. They're not allowed to be influencing the thought, speech, and action, but they were active. So in other words, during davening, there's less of a battle. That's the bottom line. Because even after davening, the battle is won. Because the Beinani, as we said, is someone that's complete control over himself. But it's only thought, speech, and action. So practically speaking, think of it like an enemy in the city. So there are times where the enemy is like asleep. So you could let your guard down a bit because you're more in control. But then the enemy awakens. So then you have to fight. You win. Because you don't let the enemy affect the thought, speech, and action. But you can't say there isn't a battle. During davening, the battle is less. Because the divine soul during the moichin the gadlus is getting all that empowered. It's being strengthened, it's being reinforced. So now, however, Alter Rebbe explains what that means, literally. It's not just it re-emerges and awakens, it's leading him to have a desire for the temptations of this world and its pleasures. Because that's what the animal soul wants. As we learned at length earlier in chapters 6 and 7 and 8. That's what the animal soul wants. And now it's come back. And it beckons and it demands. That's because that additional energy that was b'shas during the opportune time of Krishma and Tefillah has departed. So now he has the battle at his hands. So what happens now? Now that we've established that, so now the Beinoni, however, rak mipnei sheloi loi levade mishpat hamalucha v'mamshola be'ir. But since the negative energy of the animal soul in the heart is not the only ruling power, just like he said before, just like the divine soul is not the only ruling power. The animal soul has a say, it's just not affecting the thought, speech, and action. But here, so also the other way around. The animal soul is not here too, he says, the ruling power and the dominance over the small city, the city, which is the person and his faculties. So the animal soul, as much as now it's coming back in full force to try to affect the person, in the Beinoni we're talking, but it's not the only force. We have a divine soul that has plenty strength with it, even after davening. So therefore, the negative energy of the animal soul is unable to bring his desire to fruition. So b'koyach is there, because the faculty is there, and the temptation is there, and the desire is there, but it can't actualize it. To influence the body's parts, the components of the body, in action. Here he goes in speech, b'maisa, dibur, speech, u'machshava mamish, or actual thought, and we'll soon understand why it means mamish, meaning active thought, deliberate thought, not thoughts that are inadvertent, which we'll soon discuss in the understanding of the Beinoni. So here we have the whole picture. Like he started out, that what? A Beinoni is someone that controls his thought, speech, and action, not the faculties. But the core of the divine soul, meaning it's of the animal soul, the core of the divine soul is not the only force that affects him. Because you also have the animal soul's faculties speaking. However, they can't affect the thought, speech, and action. During davening, we have an additional strength that even on a faculty level, the divine soul dominates and the animal soul is subdued, as we'll see in a moment, like as if it's asleep. And then after davening, the battle begins to rage again, and the Beinoni has the control, because it's not just the animal soul that has a say, the divine soul also has a say. And as such, it doesn't allow the desires of the animal soul to express themselves and actualize themselves. Yeah. And he continues. So it doesn't have the ability to actualize itself and manifest in the body in action, speech, and thought. Lahaimik machshavte. Now he's going to explain an additional point. Because here seems to be a question. You're saying the Beinoni can control. So then, two questions. So what's the animal soul's effect? Bottom line, the Beinoni is stopping it, subduing it. So why are we even talking about it? Secondly, can it really control? The fact of the matter is, since there's a Yetzer Hara, there's going to be something that's going to affect you. So he's going to explain both questions and answer that it's true. The animal soul does have an effect. but only in things that we have no control over, inadvertent thoughts, but not deliberate ones. So it speaks to you, you hear it. So the enemy in the city is speaking up, but you don't let it ultimately impact you in thought, speech, and action. That's what he says now. Lahaimik machshavte. So now the divine soul's power is not allowing the animal soul as much as it wants to affect you, but it doesn't allow lahaimik machshavte, the thoughts to dwell, lahaimik, with a certain type of deliberate effort, to dwell on the thoughts, b'tainuge elam hazeh, to allow his thoughts to dwell on the pleasures of this world. Eich l'maylis tavis libei, how to satisfy his heart's desire. So here you see a few key points that need to be addressed. A person could have, and we're going to discuss this more briefly, a person could have a thought to do something, but it's just a thought. What happens next? Now you can think about an idea that's not appropriate thought, but you're not necessarily doing it. You're not even thinking of doing it. So the actual inadvertent thought we're going to learn soon, that we don't have control over. But you have control, you're going to dwell on it. And secondly, are you going to act on it? And in both areas, the Beinoni does not allow that to happen. So not only you don't dwell on the thought, and don't think about how am I going to fulfill this desire. With a Rosha, both things happen. You can dwell on it, and also plot how to do it. There are many people who have back from negative thoughts, they never plan on doing it. It's just a negative thought, which is also not appropriate. That also makes a person a Rosha, because a machshav is thinking something inappropriate. The Beinoni deliberately will never focus and dwell on something, and he says, "And eich l'maylis tavis libei," how to fulfill it. So here from Tanya's mashma, it's one continuation. It doesn't say ve'eich l'maylis, how to fulfill it. He says to dwell on it, how to fulfill it. That means the dwelling is in order to fulfill it, and that doesn't happen. Okay. So now we understand that aspect of the Beinoni. And now the question is, so what's the power that Beinoni has? What is he exercising? Why is a Beinoni different than a Rosh? Or to put it in different words, what allows us to become like a Beinoni? What do we need to activate here to make sure that even though we have an active animal soul, we don't allow it to impact our thought, speech, and action, to dwell on it. Definitely not to speak and not to act on it. So what is it that we have? What does the Beinoni have that gives him that power? The animal soul is part of him. It's an inherent part of who you are. And it naturally has temptations, like we learned. Temptations for the desires of this world. During davening, you have additional power that keeps it at bay. But after davening, it comes back. So what tak is the Beinoni doing? What exactly is he doing? What is he activating here? What power does he have? And here comes one of the tremendous chidushim, psychological insights from the Alter Rebbe. He says like this. So what is it that he has? What power does he have to suppress and not allow this faculty to to actualize? Again, we're talking about dwelling and acting on it. Even though he can't control the faculty itself, but he can control its effect. What does he have? So he brings now from Zohar, Ki hamoyach shalit al halev. K'may shekosav b'Zohar Parshas Pinchas. Why? Because the moyach shalit al halev literally means that the brain rules over the heart. The mind rules over the heart. And that's natural, like he can explain. It says in Zohar Parshas Pinchas, volume 3 in Zohar, that is 224a, that's Reish Chof Daled Omer Aleph. That's what it says in Zohar. And here comes the Chiddush. The Zohar doesn't say Is this natural or is this acquired? So Alter Rebbe adds, Shekach Neitzer ha'adam, I'm sorry, Ki meich shalt al halev b'teldose v'teva yitzirose. That this is b'teldose, it's inherent, and it's his natural capacity. It's not an acquired skill. Shekach Neitzer ha'adam b'teldose. For that is how a man has been formed from birth. So a human being has an inherent quality, just like we have the natural quality to see with our eyes, a healthy person. We have a natural quality of self-control, of the mind over the heart. Shekol adam yachol, he continues, this means that every person can, with the willpower of his brain. Interesting expression. So there's the mind, but there's the will of the mind. Meaning the mind is being used to control, to guide. Lisapek ulimshal beruach tavase shebelive. To restrain himself, refrain, and take control of his heart's urges. Shaloila malis mishailas libe b'maisa dibur machshava. To prevent his heart's desires from being enacted, spoken or contemplated. Again, maisa dibur machshava. We have that control. You don't have control, for example, whether you have blue eyes or brown eyes. You have no control whether you have faculties, and in this context, whether they're the animal faculties. You're born with them. But you have control, natural control, just like you're born with the faculties of the animal soul that desires the pleasures of this world. You also have naturally self-control, an additional element that the divine soul has. And that's what gives it this power. And furthermore, not just to restrain and refrain, but even when there is an inadvertent thought that comes from the animal soul that you don't have control over, as we'll speak about later, is to distract himself, to divert his attention. Legamri, completely. Metayves libay elahepach legamri. From the desires of his heart and its urges to something completely different. So it's not just to divert and distract, but legamri, completely, and apply your thoughts somewhere else altogether. So it's not just about stopping yourself from thinking something negative. Because the mind is mishetat tamid, the mind is constantly turning like a wheel. You have to think about something. So he's adding to divert, to refrain, but then to divert and actually move your attention to something else. You're focusing, your mind brings up something inadvertently, something unhealthy or inappropriate. You change your mind into something else. You have that natural ability. It doesn't acquire a training. You need to want to. But the moyach has that. That's the moyach shalit alalev. Why does it say rotzen shalat alalev? Because the rotzen is working through the moyach, and also the nefesh halakis resides in the moyach. And the mind understands. The reflective mind has that power. So someone calls you and tries to sell you a marketing pitch, the telemarketing thing. They tell you have to buy this and this product, and they know how to manipulate your emotions. And tell you, and you say, I want to think about it. No, there's no time to think. The offer expires immediately. If you allow your mind in, your mind will say, 1 second, let me reflect on this. How do I know if it's good? If it's so good, I'll decide by tomorrow. But the emotional manipulator doesn't want you to wait, because they don't want your reflective mind to come into play. But naturally, if you allow yourself and don't let your emotions to be manipulated, what do you think will happen? Your mind will reflect, and you come to realize, I don't need this. Or it's worthless, or it's a scam, etc. So you have this natural ability. Now, why is it so critical, the natural? Because if it's not natural, the animal soul is natural to us. We're born with it. It's not something we acquire. And we know something natural is always going to be more powerful than something acquired. Even if it's training and so on. Even the Bainani trained himself, like we discussed earlier. But it's not just training. He has actually an inherent power. And that inherent power allows him that self-control. He has to exercise it. He has to use it. That's what makes the Beinoni so special. He uses it. The Rasha is not using it, or at times he uses it. The Beinoni is constantly on guard and constantly allowing that superior quality of the mind to reflect and not allow himself to act, speak, or think deliberately anything negative, anything that's not divine, anything inappropriate. Which is a tremendous concept, because when you compare it, just by contrast, for example, to the Freudian id, where it says that person naturally is a selfish, pleasure-seeking animal. And that's who you are. You have an ego, a ego superimposed for coexistence. It makes sense to be civil, but you're naturally a selfish person. So at best you can be expected to keep it at bay, red lights and green lights, but it's not your natural being. Natural being is, push comes to shove, survival of the fittest. Lahavdil, by contrast, Alter Rebbe is saying something long before modern psychology. No, you're inherently not id, but yid, a pintele yid. There's a divine part of you. But more than that you're naturally self-control. Self-control is not an acquired skill. It takes time to develop. Like a newborn baby can't exercise self-control, but that's not because it's not inherent. It's because the baby, just like its mind, it has a natural mind. It has natural skills, musical skills, but the child has not yet developed the actual instruments to implement it. But self-control is something that is natural to us. And when it does come, it's natural to you. As I just said, it takes time to emerge, but not because it needs to be learned. It's not an acquired skill. It's not coming from education. Education may tell you where to apply that discipline, but it's natural. Like we see when people really want something, their focus is so powerful they can control their emotions. They can go without eating, without sleeping. They can even go to a point where they don't even realize that they're hungry or tired. Because when that focus is there, that's what a person has. We have that ability. An animal can't be that way. You can't prosecute a predator for attacking prey, because that's how they're naturally wired. You can't expect Ma'ashal Talalev. You can't expect an animal to fast in Yom Kippur. It has to eat. A human being has the power, the natural power, that when the Rotzen Shebemeach is active, to control the subjective emotions, the impulses, naturally. And that's the big chiddush, naturally. And that's why we have the ability to control the animal soul. Not its existence and not its faculties, but its effect on us. So in certain ways, we're going to learn later, there's more power to that than even at tzaddik, because at tzaddik the battle is over. He's won the battle. Here the battle rages, but the moich shal talev is coming into play. During davening, you have additional strength that gives the power that subdues the animal soul, because the moich and the gadlus that feeds the mind and the emotions and the actions of the divine soul. So that's what he says here. So even after davening, because the animal soul is not the only one to control, there's a divine soul, and the divine soul resides in the moich shal talalev, that has the power to. Now, why do you need rotzen shebemeach? Because rotzen is ultimately a dominant. Rotzen is a memshola. It's like when the rotzen hamelach. So when you combine the moyach, the reflective mind that understands what's right and doesn't allow itself to be controlled by the whims and subjective whims of the heart, as we learned in chapter 9, that comes from the left side of the heart. So the right side of the heart and the mind, and there's the rotzen, the will to do what God wants, that has that's natural to us and has the power to the discipline and the self-mastery that the Beinoni exercises. Let's just go one more line. So we have the power to divert our minds, not just to refrain, but to divert to something complete opposite from taivas libe, from the desires of the heart. Means even if you divert it toward thinking mathematics, something neutral, something that's not necessarily Kedusha, but not necessarily the opposite. But not the opposite. But Frat al Sadik Kedusha, you can take the mind and now divert it to what? To Torah, for example. So that has the power to control the animal soul. And then he's going to come now and bring a proof to that, and that we'll do in the next year. So we'll stop here. A good tavach, TanyaApplied.com for this and all previous programs. Be well.
This has been My Life, Tanya Applied with Rabbi Simon Jacobson. Please join us again next week. Visit ChasidusApplied.com for archived classes and more resources.